All right, so our first speaker. She's hiding somewhere. There she is. So Chantel Astorga. She works at ITD, the highway program, focusing mainly on the road between Stanley and Lowman. And you guys do a little bit of stuff in some other places. I'll let you describe that. Before that, she worked at Snowbird as a pilot for about 6 years, so kind of like a lot of folks, has worked in a few different sides of the industry for a while. With that, I'll just say take it away, Chantel.
Thanks, Scotty. Yeah, so Scotty asked me to come here and just give you guys some, show you guys a few slides of some avalanches that we had this year. It's not uncommon for this section of highway to see avalanches, but we had a couple cycles this winter that were historical. And outside of this winter, we had one other one in 2014 that was sort of a historical avalanche cycle. So I'm just going to kind of run you guys through a few of those. And is there anybody in here who's unfamiliar with where State Highway 21 Canyon Creek is? Everybody? Yeah. So between Lowman and Stanley is the highway. It's an 11-mile. It supports the keeping the highway open is important because it supports the rural communities of places like Stanley, Chalice, and Salmon. And it's an 11-mile section of highway. It's an interesting highway because its highway elevations range from 5,000 to 7,000 feet, and then the vertical, the top of the paths are up to 9,000 feet. So we kind of get all weather patterns, and same, like we have continental, intermountain, and maritime type snowpack there. We get the cold airflow out of Stanley, which also causes us problems. But for those of you who are unfamiliar, this is sort of the main section of Canyon Creek. It's fairly complex terrain, and this is a 2-mile section of highway right here in the 11-mile road closure area, and this is where the majority of our problems exist. From right here on the highway to the summit is 3,000 vertical feet. These paths are steep, complex, and the highway is right in the track. There's no run-out zone, and so as you can also see, it's a terrain trap. So any avalanches, whether they're small or big, tend to make fairly decent-sized piles on the highway because of that. We also have avalanche terrain right in this area, which really makes this part of the road interesting because it's the narrowest part of the canyon, and that area looks like this. This used to not be a problem, except there was a fire in the early 2000s. It was thickly forested before, and that fire burnt that area, and then a lot of the anchors and stuff, the trees have just fallen down over time. And then in 2014 we had a big avalanche cycle out of this area, which has really cleaned it up, and it's not uncommon now to see a lot of activity off of this side of the canyon. Feel free to ask questions at any point too, if you have anything. But so Canyon Creek, we see avalanches every year. It's not uncommon. We tend to close the road, like I would say on average now, 4 to 5 times a year. Probably 95% of those closures, we see natural activity hit the highway. These are common avalanches that we see on the highway. They're not small, they're big avalanches. It's funny how things change though, because now these start to seem small after the avalanches we've been seeing the last couple years. But this is one of the rotaries we have in the canyon. This is the biggest thing they make. That head on it, the auger, lifts up to 30 feet high, and I don't think we could keep the highway open without that thing, although it did break down this year. So if any of you guys travel through Canyon Creek a lot, I apologize. We had the road closed a lot the last 2 months. A lot of equipment malfunctions and personnel stuff. But so on March 6th in 2014, we had what we considered a historical avalanche cycle. And some of that is based on, there's a maintenance worker that's been there for almost 30 years now. And so he was there in the early days of the highway just being flat out closed in the wintertime, and then they'd go in May and start cleaning up the avalanches. And this avalanche was bigger than anything he had seen, even going in after an entire winter of the road being closed and cleaning up debris piles. And this was also on that side of the road that had burnt and really hadn't seen avalanche activity previously. But for those of you that remember this winter, it was pretty dry in December and January. And we had very little snow on the ground in early December, and then December 2nd we had a rain event that had a flash freeze, and then up to minus 20-degree temps for like the 10 days following. No snow through January, and then we had a lot of snow in February. In early March we closed the highway due to this 28-inch, 2.6-inch of water storm. We closed it midway through that storm. We had a 1-day break, and then on March 6th we received 2 tenths of water, which just isn't that much. But that 2 tenths was the tipping point for this avalanche that maybe it's kind of hard to see, but it was probably close to a 1/4 mile wide, and it ran basically just above the ground the entire winter snowpack. And this ran into the train trap, tightest part in the canyon, dammed the creek, and flooded the highway. And so we didn't really know what to do with that, so we just let it sit. And eventually the water found its way through, and then we started cleaning up. This is what the debris pile looked like after. It was super difficult to clean up due to the amount of trees and stuff in it. That's not a traffic cone, that's a very large man standing in there. And this cleanup, this was probably about 60 feet of debris on the highway, 1/4 mile wide, and a lot of trees, and this took us, probably like 10 days to clean up. And there's a lot that goes into the cleanup, which I think it's easy to not think about that part of it, but it requires an immense amount of equipment and a lot of time. And it also requires everybody coordinating well with each other to sort of get into flow and make progress. And when this year we had a lot of problems with equipment breaking down, everything, and getting snow. We've always used a dozer in the canyon, which is not the right tool for cleaning up avalanche debris, but that's what those guys have done forever, so that's what you're supposed to do. And we were like, oh, snowcats are a lot more useful, and they're made to be on the snow. And so after we convinced them of that, they brought snowcats from other districts in the state that use them for building snow berms on the interstates, and 3 of those broke down each cycle. So anyway, it was hard to make progress. But on February 9th this year, we had another avalanche cycle that we kind of at the time considered a historical cycle. As you guys know, around here we had these long duration storms, and typically in Canyon Creek I would say that we often can tolerate 1 inch of water. But usually when we get in that 1 to 2 inches of water, that kind of becomes this gray zone, and also around 2 inches, you can almost guarantee that we're going to have natural avalanches hitting the highway. But this year we kind of stepped into this whole new thing where we started getting storms were 5 to 8 inches of water, which is a lot for that area. And especially one thing to mention is that we get the Stanley airflow down into the canyon, so we get super cold temps in December and January, which tends to make super weak snow, and that's even in the low elevation areas. And then because the lower part of the canyon has avalanche paths that go from 5 to 6,500 feet, those tend to get a lot of rain midwinter, and they also have northeasterly aspects to them. So we get avalanches down there because of that, and then the mid-canyon you kind of have the alpine, all elevation, and we also tend to get more snow in that area than most everywhere else in the state. So we do average pretty high snow totals, but for this area. But anyway, on February 9th, we considered the snowpack that we had to be strong and deep. It was an 11-day storm, totaling 63 inches, 7.7 inches of water. Another thing that we don't normally get in Canyon Creek, I guess it's orographics, is we don't really deal with wind. It's not like a driving factor. Like we don't really ever consider it as like, oh, we have strong winds, like that's gonna cause a problem. It's not a windy place, so the powder skiing stays like really good all the time. And this winter with these storms that rolled through, we just had these really strong southwest winds consistently, and those things, the southwest winds is what loads those big starting zones, because they all have a bit of northeasterly to them. And so we had that going on, and we didn't have an anemometer that works. We just knew it was windy. None of our weather stations worked. I'm surprised we made it through the winter. But anyway, light density snow early on, and then finished off with rain. We had 17 Class 3 avalanches hit the highway, and then 3 Class 4s with this one. It was also the first time in my 7 years of working there that we hit 100 inches, which I thought was super cool. We hit it 130 inches eventually, but I thought that was a pretty great thing. And anyway, we don't oftentimes heli bomb in this canyon, just because, you know, typically the storms pass, and when you have a nice clear day, it's a little bit too late oftentimes to get avalanches from explosives. But if we have a bunch of people that are going to be working on the highway under these big, sort of congested, dangerous areas, then we will heli bomb. And so we had Sun Valley Heli Skiing. Chris Templeton flew us this time. We didn't get any activity out of it, but the natural activity we had on the highway was pretty widespread. And this was in that middle part of the canyon. This slide was interesting. It came down and it took a hard right turn on the highway. And then it kind of separated in these big chunks that would like run by themselves for periods, and then it eventually stopped down here. But this pile was about 60 feet deep, and these piles were about 30 feet deep, and it was kind of interesting to figure out how to clean those up and move them off the highway, just because usually like with a dozer, it's comforting to have a wall on the side of you, but these were like peaks in the center of the highway. This is one of our the biggest path, biggest vertical. It's called Grand. And this thing rarely hits the highway because it's one of the few paths in the canyon that has like a nice apron run out. This thing hit the highway 3 times this year. I'm not really sure why, except maybe because it had a super slick track or something after it hit it once. I don't know. Jenkins, who's over here hiding in the corner, works with me also. Anyway, just a nice photo of all the equipment it involves. On any given cleanup that's this big, you tend to have 2 front loaders, 2 rotaries, which are these guys with it's like a snowblower, an excavator, and then we also had a dozer and a snowcat. And then District 4 from Stanley came in from the top and started working down on some of these too. So we were working from both ends, and they still took 10 to 12 hours a day, close to 10 to 12 days of cleanup. And if the state allowed it, you would work 24-hour shifts and just do split shifts, but that's not always what you get. You don't always get what you want with the state. But also during this avalanche cycle in early February, a lot of areas in the state that have pretty infrequent return intervals also struggled with big avalanches hitting the highway. This is State Highway 75 from Stanley to Chalice, and these guys had a lot of avalanche activity down on the lower road this year. It's not uncommon for them to have avalanche activity, but usually it's manageable stuff, and this stuff got pretty big, and they did get to the point where they were like, we're not going in there like unless somebody comes down and sort of keeps an eye on us. And so I went down there, and I think they had about 30 slides similar to these that were, you know, the front loader was maxing its bucket out trying to reach the top of them. They didn't really have the right equipment to clean it up, but we managed. And the nice rock mitigation project down below Sunbeam that they spent the last 3 years working on, like 50% of it was on the highway from avalanches, tearing them out. They obviously didn't talk to anybody about snow and stuff before they installed it, but so anyway, after February, we were like, wow, we had this historical avalanche cycle. It's kind of exciting, right? Because it's exciting to see big avalanches on the highway until you have to clean them up, and then it becomes a drag. But we were, made a bunch of overtime, and we were like, oh, that was cool. And then, like, what's the chances of having another avalanche cycle? Just like, I think we had the road open for a week and a half, and we were like finally resting up from it. And then this, while we were trying to get the road reopened, we had this, storm that came through that produced 55 inches of snow and almost 6 inches of water, and got the road open, had a few day break, and then this next storm came in with another 50 inches of snow, and managed to stay open through a good part of that. But then we saw this rain coming, the 1 inch of rain, and we were like, okay, let's close. And we also had the really strong southwest winds, and we thought, oh, we'll probably get some avalanche activity, but how bad can it be? We already had a big cycle. And so these same 3 that ran in the previous cycle repeated themselves in the same way, but bigger. Basically, they all initiated, we could see them from across the highway, they all initiated with slabs up on these northeast sides. And this one was the biggest problem, and this thing ended up being about 80 feet deep on the highway, and this time, instead of running to like here, it ran all the way down to here, which it's like hard to find safe spots in this canyon, but like, you kind of like dub different areas as like, oh, this is a safe spot. And we'll like park equipment here after we clean this sled up. And then it's like you walk, during the first cycle, we cleaned up this slide, the one in February, and parked equipment here. This guy, Bob, who's been there for 30 years, was like, this is a safe spot. And then we came in, and like the avalanche debris was like right here. And we were like, okay, maybe that's not a great safe spot. And this time in March, this avalanche ran straight down to here. And so this was that first path, Grand down low, the one that I said that rarely hits the highway because of the apron. This was a big avalanche. And this was the one that ran straight down the highway. And we're good at placing road signs. Right? I think that thing made it. But this one was kind of fascinating because it made these like giant walls, these giant ice walls on the side, and then this thing was perpendicular to the highway, and this was about 80 feet tall. And basically this stuff ran, like this is that side we were just looking at, and this is the highway down here, and it's just covered in avalanche debris forever. So this is what the cleanup looked like. And yeah, so this year we've had 64 natural avalanches hit the highway. On average, we probably get 20 to 30. And then, yeah, one was a class 4 plus. You kind of were like, oh, maybe that's a class 5, but then like, it might be too dramatic to label it that, so we put the double plus. I was like, these are like what you see in the Alaska range, like, it's massive. But anyway, hopefully that's it for the season. But yeah, it's been a tiring and active season. And it's kind of cool, yeah, when the roads close that much, you can just kind of hang out on the center line and have lunch. This is Bill, he works with us too. So, does anybody have any questions? HP?
The picture of the big slides and all the runouts were so brown. Did you have failure of the soil that was like below the snow?
Yeah, that March cycle, yeah, those were super dirty. I think, basically the first cycle in February kind of ran, like the tracks were kind of down to the dirt and then with like ice on it. And where they initiated it was just the new snow, like in the slabs, but I think just running down the tracks picked up a lot of rock and dirt.
So you didn't have like a subsurface failure, like way into the soil?
Maybe in the tracks, I don't know. What do you think, Jenkins? That's kind of, certainly not in the starting zones. Yeah, but probably in the tracks. I think, it had been raining so much down lower in the tracks through that second cycle that it probably just gouged it like down to the ground, it looked like.
Any other questions for Chantel?